You're checking your phone. There's a message from someone you used to talk to every day. You read it, you mean to reply, and then somehow 3 weeks pass. You're not angry with them. You're not busy in any way you could actually explain if someone asked. You just didn't. And now the silence has gotten so wide that responding feels harder than it should, so you don't. And the gap grows again, quietly, on its own. If you've watched this happen to someone you know, a friend who used to text back within minutes and now seems to have vanished into their own life, you've probably landed on an explanation. They got busy. They got successful. They changed. Maybe they just don't need people the way they used to. That explanation isn't wrong exactly, but it treats the disappearance as a decision, something chosen on purpose, and for a specific kind of person, often sharp, self-aware, high-functioning. That's rarely what it feels like from the inside. It doesn't feel like choosing distance. It feels like something closer to erosion. So the more interesting question isn't, why did they pull away? It's this: what was the withdrawal protecting them from? Here's where it gets less intuitive. Intelligence often comes packaged with a heightened awareness of consequence. A person who thinks in long chains of cause and effect doesn't just see a conversation, they see where it might lead. A quick reply invites a follow-up question. That question invites an explanation. That explanation might require energy they don't currently have, or might reveal something about their life they're not ready to discuss, or simply cost more than it looks like it costs. So the brain, running a kind of silent cost projection, quietly downgrades the message from urgent to later. And later, repeated enough times, becomes never. This is different from apathy. It's closer to a nervous system doing triage. Highly analytical people are often exhausted not by socializing itself, but by the anticipatory modeling that comes before it, predicting how a conversation will go, what will be expected of them, whether they'll have to perform a version of themselves they don't have the bandwidth for that day. Psychologists sometimes describe this as social cognitive load, the mental cost of simulating another person's expectations before you've even opened your mouth. For some people, this simulation runs constantly, in the background, uninvited. There's also a developmental thread worth pulling on. Many people who withdraw this way learned early that being the reliable one or the smart one came with a price, that competence got rewarded with more responsibility, not more care. If you were the kid who always had it together, who could be trusted to handle things, you may have quietly absorbed a rule. Needing anything is inefficient. Rest is unproductive. Vulnerability is a liability. So the adult version of you doesn't reach out when things get hard. You go quiet instead, because quiet feels safer than being perceived as anything less than capable. And this is where the paradox shows up, the part that flips the whole story. The very trait that makes someone easy to rely on, good at solving problems, sharp enough to see 10 steps ahead, is the same trait that isolates them. Because if you can anticipate every way a conversation might go wrong, you can also talk yourself out of having it in the first place. The mind that's good at protecting you from disappointment is just as good at protecting you from connection. It doesn't distinguish between the two. It just sees risk, and it minimizes exposure. There's a second, quieter paradox underneath that one. Disappearing often isn't a sign that someone has stopped caring. It's frequently a sign that they care too precisely. They don't want to give someone a version of themselves that feels incomplete, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. So instead of showing up partially, they don't show up at all. It feels internally like respect. From the outside, it reads as abandonment. Both of those things can be true at once, and that gap between intention and impact is where most of the hurt in these situations actually lives. None of this means the withdrawal is free of cost. It's tempting, once you understand the mechanism, to reframe it entirely as protective, even admirable, the mind of a careful person doing careful things. But that would be its own kind of dishonesty. People on the other side of that silence still feel forgotten. Relationships still erode from lack of contact, regardless of how sound the internal logic was. Understanding why something happens doesn't undo what it costs. A pattern can be a reasonable adaptation and still leave behind real damage. Both things sit there, together, unresolved. What tends to make this cycle self-sustaining is shame. Once enough time has passed without a reply, the thought of responding stops being simple. It stops being, "Hey, sorry, been quiet," and becomes something that feels like it requires an explanation, an apology, an accounting for the silence itself. And explaining silence is, ironically, more exhausting than the silence was to begin with. So the person avoids the explanation, which extends the silence, which makes the eventual explanation feel even more necessary. It's a loop with no natural exit point, which is often exactly why it keeps going long before anyone intended it to. If you recognize this in yourself, it's worth noticing that the instinct isn't really about the people you're avoiding. It's about protecting a narrow, depleted reserve of energy and using absence as a way to keep from spending what you don't have. That's not coldness. It's closer to a kind of quiet self-preservation that never learned a better strategy, one that doesn't require disappearing entirely to feel safe. And this same pattern rarely stays contained to friendships. The same mind that goes quiet on a group chat is often the one that puts off the doctor's appointment, delays opening the email that would resolve something in 5 minutes, but somehow never gets made. Different context, same architecture. A mind quietly calculating the cost of contact and choosing, again and again, to pay in distance instead.